This video is brought to you by Squarespace, an all-in-one platform for building your brand and growing your business online. Hello, my beautiful doves. My name is Mina, and today we're going to be talking about the new Netflix adaptation of Persuasion and some other fun Jane Austen stuff. So, for anyone who's out of the loop right now, Persuasion was released July 15th. It stars Dakota Johnson in the lead role as Anne Elliot, opposite Cosmo Jarvis as the love interest, Captain Friedrich Wentworth. The short summary is that Anne and Wentworth had a love affair 7 years ago, but Anne was persuaded, by friends and family to end the relationship because Wentworth wasn't rich enough. Fast forward to the present day, and Anne's family is broke, while Wentworth has become rich after the war. They both still haven't gotten over it, and as fate would have it, land in the same social circle. Yearning ensues. Persuasion was famously Jane Austen's last novel, completed in 1816 when Jane was 40 years old. Jane Austen never published the manuscript herself. Some people speculate that she was unhappy with it and that she wanted to keep revising it further. I read Persuasion myself in my little used secondhand bookstore copy that has some questionable stains. Actually has two endings in it. It was Jane's sister, Cassandra Austen, who gained ownership of Jane's books and manuscripts after she passed away, who decided to put her manuscript for Persuasion into print along with Northanger Abbey in 1817. So without further ado, let's get into it after this commercial break. On Squarespace, you can design and send out newsletters like I did here. These are just some photos that my friend Ella Metler took of me a few weeks ago, but you can put anything in the newsletters, blurbs, events, products you're selling, etc. You can also support your causes by gathering contributions with PayPal, Apple Pay, Stripe, and Venmo. And of course, Squarespace has powerful built-in analytics, so you can see who's visiting your site and more, with page views, traffic sources, time on site, most read content, audience geography, etc. Check out squarespace.com for a free trial, and when you're ready to launch, go to squarespace.com/MinaLay to save 10% off your first purchase of a website or domain. First, a little history lesson so we all understand how we got here. The first Jane Austen theatrical adaptation was Pride and Prejudice in 1940, starring Greer Garson as Lizzie Bennet and Laurence Olivier as Mr. Darcy. Michael Cramp credits Hollywood for being largely responsible for the resurgence of Austen mania among American academic and popular culture. Around the time of this movie's release, MGM, which produced the movie, they also bought the rights of the Broadway adaptation of Pride and Prejudice, and they didn't actually have to do this because Pride and Prejudice was in the public domain, but it was all a publicity stunt to get more attention for this movie because beforehand, no one really knew about Jane Austen in America. Subsequently, the film was a great success and led MGM to launch its greatest book promotion in years, with no less than 5 popular priced editions of the book getting into print as a result of the film. Despite this initial push, Jane Austen didn't really become Hollywood's forever girl until 1995 when Ang Lee's Sense and Sensibility came out. That same year, we saw a cinematic release for Persuasion and Clueless and the TV series Pride and Prejudice on BBC. So why all these adaptations all at once? Well, some academics thought this flock to Austen was an indication of social decline. Lionel Trilling suspected that his students longed for a course on Austen because through studying her, they hoped to, in some way, transcend their sad contemporary existence. Not everyone was a fan of this social decline theory. Andrew Higson, in his book Film England, writes that Austen adaptations were piggybacking off of the general theme of creating costume drama productions, as well as the rise of the rom-com in the 90s. He notes films that incorporated these trends, such as A Room with a View, Enchanted April, Howard's End, The Age of Innocence, Remains of the Day, and Little Women had done surprisingly well at the box office. Lindsay Duran also noted that filmmakers didn't believe romantic period dramas were feasible until the 90s demonstrated that they were commercially viable. The idea of investigating romance, does it kill young girls or make them better, is intriguing to a lot of us, and then The Age of Innocence actually got made. That made it acceptable. Everybody said, wow, you can get that cast and that director for that? Since then, there's been plenty of Jane Austen adaptations, for better or for worse. Among the more unconventional ones are Fire Island, a gay Asian rom-com that used the framework of Pride and Prejudice, Austen Land, a Regency theme park romance loosely based on Pride and Prejudice, Unleashing Mr. Darcy, which is the dog show version of Pride and Prejudice, and of course, how can we forget Pride and Prejudice and Zombies? Pride and Prejudice seems to be the most popular framework for adaptations. All of this is to say that Jane Austen adaptations have been in the public eye for the last 20, 30 years or so, and most of us have been exposed to one of these movies at one point or another, or at least our mothers have. And I think that's probably why a lot of people tend to be very gatekeepery about Jane Austen, and they also usually have that one adaptation of that one novel that they think is better than all the rest. For me, it is Pride and Prejudice 2005. I don't care. I know it doesn't have Colin Firth. Stay mad about it. So when the Persuasion trailer dropped some weeks ago, it was met with an unsurprising amount of criticism. A lot of people on Twitter were angry about how the dialogue was very clunky and modernized and like trying to be hip.
Worse than strangers. We're exes.
There were also a lot of early comparisons to Fleabag, which is a TV show that is famous for the main character breaking the fourth wall. Breaking the fourth wall is one of those polarizing tropes. I think it could work sometimes, but just not for Persuasion. So come the movie's release, and to be honest, I did not have high expectations from looking at the trailer. I was one of those Twitter haters. In this new adaptation, Anne Elliot is snarky.
I think I'm in your way.
Perhaps you can correct that.
She's a wino.
How would you dance to Beethoven?
Alone in my room with a bottle of red.
Charles.
I spend my time drinking fine wines.
And she has bad table manners.
So, Wentworth doesn't have a moustache.
Charles wanted to marry me first.
The Anne Elliot in the book is this melancholy, mature young woman. She is lonely and pessimistic, but still dignified and graceful and caring. I feel like the writers for Persuasion were trying to update Anne to appeal to like young millennials and Gen Z, and they were trying to piggyback off of protagonists that we've seen a lot of these days, notably Fleabag, Sally Rooney's protagonist, the girl from my Year of Rest and Relaxation. I think I've tapped into this discourse a little bit for my Tumblr Girls Coming Back video, but all of these characters fall into the dissociative feminist movement. They are sad and self-aware. Emmeline Klein explains the appeal and how it works in Persuasion for LitHub. The dissociation that seems part and parcel of the messy millennial hot girl's lifestyle might be tied to a desire for control, an impulse to self-narrativize, to typecast themselves before the world does it for them. By rolling her eyes at the camera when someone insults her appearance, sharing a sidelong glance with it when someone comments on her lack of a future without a man, making a joke to it at her own expense through tears, and winking at it when she finally ends up in her lover's arms, this film's Anne seems to be trying to tell us that she's not like other spinsters.
I'm not like other girls. I'm not.
The problem is Anne Elliot is far from hot and messy. Jane Austen even described Anne's character herself as being almost too good for me. And to be honest, Anne is supposed to be like the other girls. She's supposed to be relatable. She was a single woman in her late 20s, which was more taboo back in the Regency period, and she was dealing with the oppressive forces that these social structures imposed on her. She essentially wasn't allowed to marry the love of her life because he wasn't good enough for her family. He wasn't wealthy enough, and he wasn't of high enough rank to appease them. And this is a problem that plagued a lot of women during the Regency period, and it was a problem that Jane Austen wanted to bring light to. Jane Austen never married, by the way. And I don't know if you guys have seen the Becoming Jane biopic, which I have a massive soft spot for. It's like my guilty pleasure because I know Anne Hathaway's British accent is abysmal. It's terrifying.
What value is there in an introduction when you cannot even remember my name?
But I love it because, one, I love James McAvoy, and he's incredibly dreamy in this movie, especially when he reads the bird mating paragraph in the library. Like, you just have to watch that, and then you'll be convinced to watch this movie.
The female utters a loud, piercing cry
of ecstasy.
And also because I am an Anne Hathaway supremacist at the end of the day. She can mess up in any of her roles and I'll still be tuning in. Anyways, there's a lot of fabrications in that movie, as we all know biopics do, but it's supposed to be based on Jane Austen's life and her rumored real-life love affair with Irish gentleman Tom Lefroy. And of course, Jane is no longer in the room with us to stand up for herself, but there are letters that people have been able to find where she talks about her crush and infatuation on Tom Lefroy. But then historical records show that Tom went on to marry someone else. Some romantics like to believe that it was a story of forbidden love, that Tom went on to marry someone who was more advantageous than Jane, and that was the reason why he left her. We don't really know. We don't really know if marriage was ever in the cards for them or if it was just like a young person's puppy love. But either way, whether she lived it or not, I think it's pretty clear that Jane Austen was aware of the obstacles that plagued women from getting married or from getting married to someone who they really loved. Klein thus criticizes Persuasion 2022 by weaving a comedic narrative out of a tragic one. The film undercuts Austen's goal. I think she wanted us to cry, not laugh. So the opening sequence of Persuasion actually reminded me a lot of Bridget Jones's Diary, which is a loosely modern take on Pride and Prejudice. It's Dakota Johnson lying down on her bed, talking about how she's thriving, obviously sarcastically.
Like I said, thriving.
It's very Bridget. And here's why it works for Bridget and not for Anne. Bridget Jones, the character Bridget Jones, is incredibly relatable, especially for single women of the early 2000s. Renee Zellweger even gained 30 pounds to fit the role of this normal woman struggling with diet culture. I personally have really mixed feelings about the way Bridget's weight was referenced throughout the movie, and I also think it's pretty unhealthy for actors to gain and lose weight just for roles. But what I did really like about Bridget is that she felt real. She was a woman constantly teetering between wanting a relationship and wanting to be an empowered single woman. And even in her weepiest hours, she was still hopeful. She had insecurities and she was imperfect. The problem with Persuasion 2022 is that we don't get to feel bad for Anne. There's not a moment for us to pause and hurt with her. All the sad scenes are just undercut with comedy or snark. Despite breaking the fourth wall, Anne's quick quips and eye rolls keep us at a distance to shield herself from vulnerability.
Statues would be erected in my name. In memory of Anne Elliot, who suffered cosmic loss, yet really held it together quite impressively.
I also want to sidebar because I know some of you are probably going to point this out and I just want to address it. I do not think Bridget Jones and Elizabeth Bennet are similar at all. I do not think Bridget Jones is a good representation of that character. But Bridget Jones' Diary is a loose adaptation, once again, so it just borrows the plot framework of Pride and Prejudice. But it's not claiming to be a straight retelling of the story. Bridget doesn't even have the same name as Lizzie. So I think that if Persuasion wanted to update the characterization of Anne Elliot so much that she's unrecognizable, then it would have been a better choice to just go for a loose adaptation. I also didn't vibe with Dakota Johnson being cast as Anne Elliot. My issue with the casting is that Anne is supposed to be this plain Jane kind of character, which Dakota is not.
Dakota Johnson.
So we don't know if that's true. Maybe he was just saying that, but he said that it was your kiss, so.
Yeah, duh.
Yeah.
And so it doesn't really make sense why the family treats Anne and categorizes Anne as this ugly spinster because she's clearly not one.
It is often said of your vibe in London, you're 10 in Bath. Well, just think, you and Elizabeth, you'll be 13s there.
No.
You'll be at least a 6, Anne.
And I do get why Dakota was cast because it's all like a monetary thing at the end of the day. This is just like a problem in Hollywood in general where a lot of movies and TV shows will cast prominent like it girls, actors and actresses with big names or who have parents with big names because they know that plans. They know that fans will flock to whatever this actor or actress is doing, regardless of whether that actor or actress makes sense for the role. And also because audiences are biased towards conventionally pretty people. Actually, one of the unfair criticisms towards 1995's Persuasion was that the lead actress Amanda Root was not this Hollywood babe. One of the complaints was that she lacks the charm with which even much homelier performers have been known to enchant an audience. Another critic said, she has pleasant eyes but a grim mouth and a countenance that doesn't invite speculation. Even though, in the literal book this is based on, Austen characterizes Anne as a few years before, Anne Elliot had been a very pretty girl, but her bloom had vanished early, and as even in its height, her father had found little to admire in her, so totally different were her delicate features and mild dark eyes from his own. There could be nothing in them now that she was faded and thin to excite his esteem. But, this isn't the first time that Hollywood has casted someone famous or tried to update the characterization of a period drama character to fit the modern mold. Back in the first Pride and Prejudice adaptation, Greer Garson's Lizzie Bennet was snappy and reminiscent of the girls of 1930s screwball comedies. And Diane F. Sadoff argues more recently how Keira Knightley and Anne Hathaway updated Jane Austen for the millennial teenage girl for their roles in Pride and Prejudice and Becoming Jane, respectively. She writes, a veteran of Bend It Like Beckham and Pirates of the Caribbean, Knightley brings a swashbuckler girlfriend sex appeal and post-feminist agency to Wright's Lizzie. Hathaway, star of The Devil Wears Prada and The Princess Diaries, attributed to Jane drive, ambition, and professional mobility. But again, for the role of Anne Elliot, who's supposed to be this down-on-her-luck singleton, it doesn't really make sense to cast a conventionally attractive it girl. I would be mad too if Dakota Johnson was cast to play Jane Eyre. There are just some roles that require a different look, and I think when every single female role is just given to a conventionally attractive woman who just looks like another conventionally attractive woman who just looks like another conventionally attractive woman in Hollywood, it's a disservice because we're not getting the diverse and in-depth types of womanhood that exist in the real world. If Jane Austen just wanted to write another pretty girl Emma Woodhouse character, she would have, but she wrote Anne Elliot instead. Also, okay, we have to address this because the way that the writers tried to write comedy was very bizarre. There's just a lot of random anachronistic phrases that were being tossed around.
I am an empath. But how do I prioritize self-care with everyone around me constantly bidding for my attention?
He's a 10. I never trust a 10.
And I think the worst part is that they didn't just try to make completely new dialogue. They tried to take the existing dialogue and push it through an Instagram filter. For instance, in the novel, there's a line where Anne says, there could have never been two hearts so open, no taste so similar, no feeling so in unison, no countenance so beloved. Now they were as strangers, nay, worse than strangers, for they could never become acquainted. It was a perpetual estrangement. And in the movie, it translates to this line.
But a heartbeat ago, there were no two souls more in rhythm than Wentworth and I. Now we're strangers. Worse than strangers. We're exes.
David Sims writes for The Atlantic, as if Persuasion doesn't have enough faith in its own plotting, it sasses the script for the viewer's sake, lest we grow bored by the familiar beats of the period rom-com. Persuasion at times seems embarrassed by its source material, or at least over-eager to spruce it up for audiences that might not be able to handle a gentler pace. Director Carrie Cracknell defended the choice in an interview with the New York Times. I was interested in the slightly more modern psychology and language because it allows us to frame the characters in a really accessible contemporary way. One of the big hopes I had for the film was to draw in a new audience to Austen and to make them feel that they really recognize the people on screen. I feel like if Persuasion wanted to go full anachronism, they should have really went for it, either with the modern adaptation, like I mentioned, like Bridget Jones, or like Bridgerton, which went full fantasy anachronism with the sex, the diversity, and the vibrant costumes, but still had a Regency vibe. The world of Persuasion ends up being this kind of uncanny valley because we're supposed to believe that this is a traditional Regency film, but then there's these anachronisms that just get peppered in that pull us out of the story. Clarisse Loughrey puts it best. Anne's pain in the novel is sharp, laced with the fear that she's reached a point in life where she's outrun every last opportunity, most especially for love. How do you absorb all of that feeling only to give us an Anne who sighs performatively after she knocks a vessel of gravy on her head and boasts about dancing to Beethoven alone in her room with a bottle of red? How would the latter even happen in an era before record players? That's what's so grim about Netflix's Persuasion. It seems to think its own audience isn't smart enough for Jane Austen. I mean, it's also just wild to me that Anne and Wentworth in the Netflix Persuasion tried to DTR, define the relationship multiple times when that never happens in the novel, because most of the novel is them just silently pining for each other. But it's as if the writers didn't believe we would understand the drama between them if they were silent. So they just had to keep getting into these weird conversations that just felt very anachronistic and honestly just uncomfortable. So let's address the costumes. They were pretty unremarkable. Costume designer Marianne Agertoft told Fashionista that she researched the time period heavily, looking at paintings and fashion plates, and then she combined that with more modern images and photographs to illustrate characters and attitude. Apparently, her 3 20th century icons that she felt represented Anne's spirit were Patti Smith, Debbie Harry, and Audrey Hepburn. And in the interview, she refers to this photo of Patti Smith in a men's shirt with a jacket tossed over her shoulder, which I guess is the inspiration for why Anne Elliot was wearing men's shirts in the movie and men's front fastening drawers. In general, I think it's such an overdone trope to have the main character wearing men's clothes to show how she is different and more progressive, because, well, one, in reality, that would just never be the case because she would be ostracized heavily for doing that. But also, you don't need to be wearing men's clothes to show that you're progressive. Waistlines in the movie were also lowered, which, I mean, okay, so I cut Pride and Prejudice some slack because I thought the dresses were really nice. And Joe Wright did say, on the record, he admitted it straight that he thought Empire waist dresses were ugly. And I kind of agree, which is why I asked Emma to keep the waistline for this dress a little bit lower than what would have been historically accurate for the time period, because I don't like the Empire waist, so I will cut Persuasion some slack for this one. I also do like that the other Elliots, who are described as quite vain and fashion forward, wear dresses that have that higher waist. I do like that Anne wears a lot of blues and organza, but I actually don't think it makes as much sense for the way they characterized her in this movie. Because when I think of blues, I think of that melancholiness and that sensitivity that characterizes the real Anne Elliot. But this Anne is pretty spunky and outdoorsy and likes to get down and dirty. Also, I really hate how she wears black because, girl, that is mourning attire. Mourning with a U, post-funeral attire. I mean, I think it was a good decision to try to put her in grays, because if I dressed Anne Elliot, I would have her in probably deeper jewel tones as well, because the fashionable color palette for the Regency period was pastel and light colors. But I think with where Anne is at in her life, it would make sense for her to subconsciously maybe age herself. But black is not the way to go, and dark gray isn't either, because it's basically black at that point. I also hated this beret moment that just makes Anne look like a moderately 1910s French girl influencer. I've also never seen a Regency dress that has this button-up collar. I can't believe I'm saying this, but I think that if they really wanted Anne to have this more masculine, more studious vibe, then they could have done what Bridgerton did for Eloise, which is have her in this kind of chemise set with a jabot detail. And that would have been a little bit more accurate. This coat that Anne wears in Lime also literally just looks like a modern day trench coat, and it probably doesn't help that Anne has a 2010 side bang hairstyle and a bold lip throughout the whole movie to tie the chaos all together. Cracknell told the New York Times, "We really tried to honor the shape and essence of the Regency form, but simplify and pull away additional detail. Sometimes in watching period films, there's a lot between me and the person. To release that and find an aesthetic that has less of the trappings of the period felt freeing." I don't know. I feel like when there's too much modernization, that gets in between me and my ability to enjoy the story. Like, for instance, I really like Peaky Blinders, but the entire first season where the main girl looked like a 2010s fashion blogger, anytime she was on screen, I felt like my brain was short-circuiting. And in Persuasion's case, I don't even feel like the costumes were deliberately trying to modernize the dress of the time period. Like, you know, I think Marie Antoinette did a really good job of keeping that silhouette of the time period, but introducing these bold colors that wouldn't be worn. For Persuasion, I felt like they were just trying to find a happy medium between Regency attire and modern day silhouettes, and the end result was just kind of like weird and lazy looking. Okay, so quickly, I do want to talk about 2020's Emma, because Emma was everything that Persuasion could have been. I love Emma so much. I think the visuals and aesthetics are perfect. The costumes are accurate while still being fun. And I think it's probably like the best adaptation. It's not my favorite, but I think it is the best adaptation of a Jane Austen novel. And I love that Emma shows how accurate costuming and bonnets can be fun and playful. It doesn't have to look like a stuffy BBC drama. And most importantly, you can tell Autumn de Wilde has read Emma, and that she likes Emma, and that she understands Emma, and she understands what her audience, who her audience is. And don't get me wrong, it's not like a completely accurate, straight book to film adaptation. There are creative liberties involved. For example, the movie really emphasized the strength of Emma and Harriet's friendship, which is a lot weaker in the novel. And when Mr. Knightley proposes to Emma in the end, we finally see her crack from her visual perfection when her nose bleeds. This wasn't in the novel, but as Ingrid S. Brody writes, the proposal is the moment when we readers most crave sincerity and direct expression from Emma. And what is more inhuman and perfect than a nosebleed? Emma is also subtly modernized. Mr. Knightley is given more character and humanity. In the 90s version, Mr. Knightley is very uptight, but in this version, we see him throwing tantrums, being stripped nude, and crying. Autumn de Wilde explained this choice to W Magazine. Mr. Knightley is going to be doing a lot of mansplaining for the movie. Lots of bossing around, lots of I'm the moral compass, I know best. And most of the time, he kind of does, because he's older and more mature and has better human instincts. And so because of that, and knowing that Mr. Knightley has often been seen as the type of character with a rod up his ass, I really felt like I wanted to see the human man, the vulnerable man underneath all of the armor. All these choices were really well thought out. You could say that Mr. Knightley's nude moment was appealing to our modern perverted enjoyment, like in Bridgerton, but that's only the first layer. The real genius of that is that by exposing flesh, de Wilde is exposing character, humanity, and vulnerability in a way that's very potent for modern audiences. In the 21st century, what we crave is depthness in our male love interests. We want to see them crying, and we want to see them stripped down emotionally. Contrast all this with Persuasion, which just hands out modernity on a platter in the form of spark notes, buzzwords, without any layers whatsoever.
He's a 10.
There's also this element of sincerity that's missing in Persuasion, but is something that is necessary for any good Austen adaptation. David Sims writes, Clueless may indulge crackling quips that wouldn't make sense any time but in the summer of 1995. But it's also a candid tale of a girl growing up and embarking on the first mature relationship of her life. Other successful Emmas, such as Douglas McGrath's 1996 version with Gwyneth Paltrow and Autumn de Wilde's 2020 version with Anya Taylor-Joy, have a similar grasp on their heroine's development from smarmy gossip to thoughtful friend and companion. Ang Lee's Sense and Sensibility, yet another wonderful 1995 Austen adaptation, understands the deep family bonds driving the drama forward. By contrast, Persuasion seems to think its best strength is its wild subversion of the author's steady narration. So in the end, this is just my opinion on Persuasion. Don't get me wrong, I don't think it's the worst Jane Austen adaptation out there. My money is on Unleashing Mr. Darcy, which I haven't seen, but if anyone has, please weigh in. I just have a feeling that's probably worse than this Persuasion.
He's got too much pride.
My good opinion, once lost, is lost forever.
She might be a little prejudiced.
I have never met a more maddening human being.
A classic love story with a modern twist.
I don't think we're ever going to stop adapting Jane Austen, and we're going to get some really great movies like Emma, and we're going to get some pretty bad ones too. Spoiler alert, apparently Ron Bass, one of the writers for Persuasion, is working on similar updates for Pride and Prejudice and Sense and Sensibility. I also think it's funny that he had to say in an interview, "I promise you that everyone involved in this adores Jane Austen and adores her work." Like, if you have to make a public statement saying that, then I think something fishy is going on in the writer's room, I fear. Regardless, I don't think this is going to signal any kind of permanent downfall of Jane Austen. If anything, I am really excited that people are talking about Jane Austen, and that's something that we can celebrate.
Hello. Let's celebrate that.
Yeah, I want to thank you all for sticking around for this long and listening to me rant about this topic. If you watched the Persuasion adaptation, please let me know your thoughts. If you have a favorite Jane Austen adaptation, I would love to hear what that is. And yeah, I hope you have a lovely rest of your day, and I'll see you next time. Bye.